Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
It's a time of transition, but for many people, this is the first time living independently, making friends, making connections with people, academic pressures, financial pressures, obviously the temptations of a big city.
That normalization, I think, very much feeds into this modern way of thinking about mental health, that of course it's a part of our life. So let's make sure if there's a need that we can fill it.
And we very much try and stick with people and kind of build the relationship. And that can take time, but it's kind of worth it. It's been really rewarding, some of the outcomes we've had.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
You're listening to the home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. This week's episode goes out as a red weather warning goes into place across the UK. So if you're listening this week, hot, innit? If you're listening at a later date, remember how hot it was in the middle of July 2022? What was all that about? Climate change, I think, is the answer. But yeah, I hope you and yours are well. Hope you're looking after yourself, staying hydrated, etc., etc. Now, this week's conversation is about student mental health. This is a conversation that comes around all the time, and it's a really important one because the student mental health conversation is one which we're probably only really, as with many of these conversations, only just now starting to open up. And there are sort of specifics around being a student, which means that mental health issues can flag. And of course, they can flag often in a place where you're not maybe registered with a GP, or you've not traditionally grown up knowing certain services that are around you. So really good to have now details of a new service which has been operating since September 2019 but has actually had some really, really positive impacts. We're talking about Greater Manchester's University Student Mental Health Services. Now what these guys do is they operate across all the major universities in the Greater Manchester area. So you've got the Royal Northern College of Music, Manchester Metropolitan University, University of Manchester, University of Salford, University of Bolton, and those universities have their individual sort of wellbeing programs. But if a student is flagged as needing specific help and support, what that means is they're able to bring in these experts, these specialists from the Greater Manchester University Student Mental Health Services. Among them, our guest on the programme, Dr. Steve Eccles, who's one of their consultant clinical psychologists. And actually, Dr. Steve will tell us about how this is working, and actually about how if you're a student and you approach a university or are aware that your university has a wellbeing policy, they can send in the cavalry, if you like, and actually bring the experts to the student based on their needs. Now, check this out. The feedback to this service, which has been up and running since 2019, is absolutely incredible. Of those students who went through this service, they rated it as, get ready for this, 98% good or excellent. That's phenomenally high, isn't it? Absolutely massive. So 98% of students who went through this rated the service as good or excellent. And actually the Department for Education have been suitably impressed as well, and will look at taking this pilot further afield. So it's not just about universities having to find their own solutions to any mental health problems that their students are having, but it's about local NHS groups, local experts, if you like, coming around universities and offering this as a way of dealing with an issue at its core, so it doesn't maybe pass in to adult life. It's a really, really fascinating service. We'll hear all about it, but let's hear first and foremost about how it came about and how the system works.
This came about in 2019, September 19, but prior to that, there'd been lots of meetings with the universities, and they got together with the local commissioning group in Greater Manchester and the Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust and looked at kind of student mental health. And there was a kind of an agreement and recognition that conventional adult services just weren't meeting the needs of the services. And each university itself have their own kind of counselling and wellbeing services, and the level of demand on them was going up kind of exponentially in terms of numbers, but also what they were reporting was increasing levels of complexity and risk. The problem then is that they couldn't manage that risk, so they're trying to get the students into traditional sort of adult mental health services, and they just don't meet the needs for students. There's lots of factors where that's a problem. So students, it's difficult for anybody to navigate the kind of mental health system. But as a young adult, you probably move to a different city. You're kind of more of a transient population. They move addresses frequently. Sometimes they're in Manchester, sometimes they'll be back at home. Often don't even register with GPs locally, which is kind of the centre point of all adult mental health, that it goes via the kind of GP. So there was lots and lots of issues. There'd obviously been a number of unfortunate suicides and an increase in suicides in the student population. So there was a real kind of momentum to get together and do something about it. So, so the universities, the 5 universities in Greater Manchester, so that's University of Manchester, Manchester Metropolitan University, the Royal Northern College of Music, University of Salford and University of Bolton, all got together and put some money in the pot. The local commissioning, Greater Manchester Commissioning, put some money in the pot, and the service was created from scratch.
So in terms of that, in terms of the call to action, if you like, and those universities, what were they saying to you? Because obviously you've highlighted there maybe some of the issues that you deal with sort of in terms of the service, but what were they saying to you about what they were dealing with, or maybe what they were struggling to deal with? Was it about, student absences turning into something else? You mentioned the suicide figures as well, which always, will horrify any particularly parents who send their children to university. What were they saying to you were the clear issues that they were having to deal with?
Okay, so there was the kind of key themes that were coming out, what they were reporting was histories of complex trauma. That's by far the most common theme that we tend to see. Emotion regulation difficulties, interpersonal difficulties, self-harm, obviously suicidal ideation, pre-existing mental health conditions. A lot of the students we've seen have been under CAMS or have also been in the care system. So there was really, really high levels of complexity and risk that just can't be managed at that kind of level. So we're a kind of step. If you think of the University Council and Wellbeing, they're the kind of front door for our service, really. So all our referrals, all the people that come to us, all the students go through the counselling wellbeing. And if they considered that they need our kind of level of support, they then stepped up to us.
I was going to say, because of course that's crucial then, the communication of the service being available, and then of course being able to sort of activate as and when that's required. When you came back to them as sort of as this sort of like a Greater Manchester University sort of student mental health service offer, I mean, were the universities just blown away? Were they like going, absolutely, basically we can call the cavalry at any point?
Yeah. There was a lot of discussion prior to me being involved, and I was there as it kind of hit the ground. But prior to that, there was a lot of discussion about what was actually needed and what the universities were saying. We don't need a kind of repetition of primary care sort of IAP services. What we need is much more kind of comprehensive, more kind of secondary care kind of level of input and support for the students. So the service that we have it's a multidisciplinary team. So we have a number of what we could refer to as case managers, but they can be usually from mental health background, nursing backgrounds, or social work backgrounds, but very experienced staff, and also psychological therapists, clinical psychology predominantly. And we also have input from a consultant psychiatrist. So it really does match more of a kind of community mental health team kind of model, although we don't kind of operate on the previous sort of CPA kind of approach. And it's very much led, so we don't really have any criteria other than the person has to be a student and that we're the best people to meet their needs.
So I was going to ask you about this because, of course, the members of the public, general members of the public might have interactions with health services for whatever reasons, may have interactions with mental health services for that reason as well. But it always strikes me that students, and you've touched on some of the elements around this, sort of the transient nature of them, the way they move around, but also that the universities, to a certain extent, have still got to take responsibility for what is still a very young, mainly young sort of cohort of people who are very much in that period where they're not children anymore, but they're not in that full adult life, if you like, because they're still under this umbrella. So it strikes me that actually, the universities there have done something really positive in saying we still need to take responsibility for these young people because they don't fit into this, you hit 18, everybody into adult services. That there is the university throws up specific issues that require a specific response.
Definitely. I mean, like you said before, it's a time of transition, but for many people, this is the first time living independently. And then they've got, all the kind of making friends, making connections with people, academic pressures, financial pressures, obviously the temptations of a big city, all the kind of good and bad things about that. But and like I say, a lot of the people do have pre-existing mental health problems. And they're leaving their existing support networks and come in and trying to forge that in their new environment. And that's really difficult for some people. And obviously we've got, I think it's about 10% of our population are international students. So not only they're coming from a different country to to do that as well.
In terms of sort of the issues that some of these people and young people are facing,
Mm-hmm.
can I share? And you hinted about some of the issues that, in particular, that you deal with. I think sometimes when people think or talk about student mental health, they talk about it based around exam pressures, pressures of finding work, and so on and so forth. But actually, from what you've said so far, there's a sense that actually it's not just about that. Actually, there's issues that they may have had when they were 13 or 14 or 15 or 16 that they bring with them because that's the way their life has moved. They're now at the point of 18, and of course they found themselves in something like a university. And I think maybe that's a little bit of a step change to maybe some of the thinking that people have around students.
I think that's a common misconception, that what we were dealing with, or what we would be dealing with, was kind of anxiety sort of things about academic work, that kind of stuff, and it really isn't that at all. I mean, obviously those people do present with those problems, but not to our service. They wouldn't get through. They'd be dealt with in the counselling wellbeing services. So we're really seeing the kind of top end, and I suppose because it's something like 1 in 2 young adults now go to university. Probably what we're seeing is representative of the wider population of not just the people who go to university. So I think what we'd like to do in the future is this model clearly works, and we get really good feedback from students and from the universities. This model could be kind of rolled out into all, for young adults, or for the adult population, or for the older adult population, because it does seem to work. This kind of very much a needs-led based thing. Lots of services work on kind of criteria. What we don't see that person, we only see that person. We don't see them with that. We don't see them with this. But we're very much open that everybody gets a kind of comprehensive assessment, and if there's a need there that we can meet, we will meet that need, and we'll certainly do our best to meet that need.
I think that echoes previous conversations we've had on the programme with services for young people in particular, and particularly those sort of open door services.
Yeah.
NHS Merseycare have, for instance, the life rooms is a good example of this, where people can go through the door and actually then the need is measured and appropriate sort of advice can be taken as well. But that speaks more of this much more modern way of thinking about our mental health, which is actually that it's part of almost everyday life, whereby if you are a student, here's where you can get a pound a pint. I don't think they do pound a pint anymore. But here's where you can go and get a drink. Here's if you've got questions about, accommodation. Here's where you can go if you've got issues around or concerns about your mental health or the mental health of a flatmate or a roommate. And that normalization, I think, very much feeds into this modern way of thinking about mental health, that of course it's a part of our life. So let's make sure if there's a need that we can fill it.
Yeah, I agree. It's very much about removing the stigma from it, isn't it? That the referrals we get to our services as well are quite skewed. So it's something like 2/3 of identify as female. We get very small representation of young males, and we know young males particularly have trouble discussing kind of mental health or accessing services. So that's kind of common thing. We're kind of underrepresented by the BAME population as well. So in the future, what we're trying to work on is how do we kind of make ourselves more open to people and responsive to the needs of those people. We had some student evaluations, and one of the things they looked at was what would help young males access our service. So we're looking at that. The other thing we need to look at as well is the offer we have to neurodiverse students, so those students with autistic spectrum conditions and ADHD. So we're getting it's something like 12% of the referrals we get have a pre-existing diagnosis of one of those conditions. And it's a figure far higher than that, because we know a lot of the people we do see have undiagnosed neurodiverse conditions.
Right. Absolutely. And I guess that's about having a door that's open, but making sure enough people walk past that door and understand what's through the door.
Yeah.
So that they can make that connection. Just in terms of the numbers, just looking at the stats around this one, Dr. Steve, nearly 1,000 students through the door since launch in September 2019. And I mean, look at this, the feedback that's been received. So we talk about, people stepping through the door, service users, I think officially known as, but people, we're talking about people here.
Yeah.
Of those who rated the service as good or excellent, 98%.
Yeah, it's quite standard, isn't it?
I mean, like if you went, would 80% be a good figure? Probably a good fit. 4 out of 5 people think it's good. 98%. You're almost hitting at, and everybody thinks it's really good. So tell me, what are students saying to you about or what feedback are they offering you about, well, when I first made contact, I didn't think this was going to happen, or I didn't think this service was available. What sort of things did they say?
I think they're quite surprised. I think those people who've had contact with either with CAMS or with other adult services, I think they're quite surprised that we are very much needs-led. We really do listen. I think that's the key thing. I think what people would say is that, or the feedback is that we listen and we kind of respond. We work kind of collaboratively with them. We're also very proactive in how we engage with people. So we know that sometimes people don't access services or because of the mental health problems. So it may be because of the low mood, or they may feel they don't deserve access, they don't deserve support, or they maybe have interpersonal issues that maybe put strains on some relationships or relationships with services. And we very much try and stick with people and kind of build the relationship. And that can take time, but it's kind of worth it. It's been really rewarding, some of the outcomes we've had.
No, fantastic. And in terms of the sort of the handover, and it's a relatively new service, but 2019 through to 2022, just tell me if you can about maybe, is there like a referral service for people when they get to the end of university? Because I imagine if there are some people who've really struggled with their mental health, find themselves connecting with this service, suddenly go, actually, this is working for me. And then they graduate and they move back to a different part of the country, they move abroad. How are you able to sort of bridge that gap, or create a pathway that's a safe pathway, if you like, for people?
So we very much kind of do proactive handover. So there are people who we've seen that are going to need support once they leave university, and what we'll then do is we'll make an onward referral, and we generally, if possible, we kind of keep hold of the student until they've kind of connected with that service. We certainly don't just leave them, to go through, which is referred to as connecting people, which is kind of a social work model, which is about plugging people into kind of local resources. Obviously, it depends where they're living, but a number of the students do actually stay around the Greater Manchester area. So there's some that, so that's kind of easier for us to do because we're familiar with what's around, what they can access. The big problem we've had is the majority of the time we've been open is COVID lockdown was happening, and pretty much everything was shut down to some level. So as now things have been open the last few months, we're kind of developing that pathway again now to connect people and plug people into resources locally.
Absolutely. Can I ask you, in terms of the universities, you mentioned them before, if you've got sort of the Royal College of Music, Manchester Met, the sort of city centre ones, but then you've got like Salford, which is essentially a city centre university, and Bolton, which is a little bit outside. Do you ever get, like, when someone comes through the door, or if you get referred a case, might you spot that this might be a music related case, or this might be a Bolton case? Like, are there different sort of signs? I just think sometimes locations and the way that people respond, the sort of the big urban or cultural environments that people come from, are there? Do you notice a difference?
I suppose there's a slightly different population. The one that stands out for me is probably the Royal Northern College of Music. They tend to have the common kind of theme from there would be kind of quite perfectionist standards. And when we've spoken to the Counselling Wellbeing Services about this at the Royal Northern College, and if you think about it, often for a musician, from a very early age, they've been practicing their instrument, it very much becomes kind of wrapped up in their identity, that kind of performance, that kind of the skills of the musician. So they tend to do have a kind of quite highly critical and kind of a perfectionist sort of trait. So often when we get the referrals, that's a common theme that kind of comes through from that particular university. Excuse me.
No, I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because of course, and I think at that age as well, and my mental health fell off a cliff at the end of university because I think I was at that point where I think I'd exhausted my abilities or capacity to sort of be involved in sort of academia. But also I was aware that the big bad adult world was this sort of fast approaching demon that I was about to have to sort of grab by the horns and right. And it always struck me as a thing where I thought, am I supposed to be ready for this? Or is me not being ready for this a failure on my part? Right. Is it a failure of the institution for not preparing me for this? And of course, instead of asking all those questions out loud, I didn't say anything to anyone. And then I just struggled on and then into adulthood for the first sort of 4 or 5 years of, post university life. And I thought very much that came from an institutionalized lack of conversation around mental health, or understanding that maybe some of the things you were experiencing were born out of your experiences, or born out of the way you'd perceived your place within sort of life. And actually, I think that for me, that I always see that as a real crunch point. And when I hear about student mental health, I think there is a crunch point in life where it's suddenly right, and now here's the real world. Now here's the big bad world.
Yeah.
And there is no right and wrong about being ready for that. But there is an opportunity, hopefully, through services like this, and I think the wider conversation around mental health, to have that resilience to know that this step is coming. And actually, when you come to it, like everyone else who's done it before you, you will step through that door, you will step into that job, or you will look for a different opportunity, or you'll stay in education, or you won't do anything for a bit until, things come away. But we need to know that those pathways might be there, as opposed to what I saw, which was a cliff edge, or a chance to fail, another chance to fail, just on the horizon.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is a really daunting prospect, isn't it? You've been in education for 3 years, or all your life, really, I suppose, isn't it? For many, this is the end of academia for them, and it's like, say, it's that transition into the big bad world of responsibility and all the kind of things that come with that, and the challenges. So yeah, it very much is about preparing people for that. Yeah, and having those conversations early on, and seeing that yes, it will probably be difficult, but you're not in this alone. It's it's not a failing on your part. It's a challenge. It's a transition. I'm trying to prepare people for that.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned there, through having those conversations, those sort of transfers as well, if you are on a mental health journey and it has been signposted, then that can continue as well. Got a bit of an update as well from the Department for Education. Department for Education have been having a look at how this service has been working. Brilliant. And they've offered you, they've given it a pretty decent sort of sense of backing as well. Just tell us what's going on in terms of how they've responded to what you've been able to offer.
Yeah, we're really, really pleased. I mean, the more general sort of thing is that there's a recognition that this is, it's a good service, it works. There's lots and lots of other services, universities that have contacted us since we've been in operation about wanting to speak to us about setting up the model. So the Department of Education, the Department of Health are really, really behind this, really see that it's a successful model, really. So we're really pleased about that. The thing we're most pleased about, I have to say, is the feedback we get from the universities and the students. So that's really high. And it although it's a challenging role and it's difficult, it's really rewarding. It's so great to see. Every year we have the graduations, and we kind of get feedback that that with the support of our service, they've managed to do really well in the studies. That's the thing. I think as a team, we're probably the most pleased about and proud about.
That's huge. And in terms of that, so if you've got the Department for Health and the Department for Education kind of going, okay, Dr. Steve, we like what you're doing here. Can it be replicated? Is the answer yes? Is it about sort of goodwill? Is it about getting people into a room? Is it about maybe local leads sort of flagging, this as a model? What are those steps that other organizations, maybe universities, can take to kind of go, well, actually, let's get these people. We've got the experts in the local area. Let's use them.
It's having that conversation. It's getting the universities and the local NHS providers together, really, and having that conversation. As I said before, the service actually went live, there was lots and lots of meetings, and I was really struck. I was involved a little bit at the end of those meetings, how very different the cultures of the universities and the NHS is. So it takes a lot of kind of relationship building and mutual understanding to come together. So that's a real key thing. That is really important, that building the relationship before you go. But there was definitely, say, that the will was there from the university. So that, you push it on an open door then, I think.
Absolutely. You mentioned your satisfaction ratings, 98%, absolutely incredible as well. And, 1,000 students to the door. Department for Health, Department for Education are impressed as well. Are universities actively sort of measuring, the service in terms of student dropouts, or are there sort of measures that they have sort of charged you with sort of delivering for them, or is the 98% enough?
Well, no. There's been 2 other evaluations. We had a kind of more of a quantitative evaluation about 18 months into the pilot. It was initially a 2-year pilot, which demonstrated that the service had a positive impact on crisis presentations at A&E and with the crisis team, what's called home-based treatment in Manchester, a reduction in those demand for those services. So they tracked some of the students' contact with those services, and then looked at and then kind of followed them up. and I saw that there was a massive decrease, which had massive kind of financial implications for those services. We also had more of a qualitative evaluation that was done by a number of student ambassadors, which they interviewed certain students who'd used the service to get feedback on what was working and obviously what wasn't working, and we kind of took on board those kind of things. Our next step is we've recently set up a university and NHS part of our team as well, kind of research and evaluation group. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the university and say, what would you like us to look at? What would be helpful for you to know from the data we've got and our experience of working with these students? What would you like to know? Can we get that information and can we feed that back? So things would be like, what impact does this have on staying in education, achieving a decent grade, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And I know, just speaking to people actually from the University of Manchester sort of research teams, that mental health research and that data, can paint a really important picture about when services are working and of course how they can be replicated as well. And just in terms of the next sort of 3 years, if you like, you mentioned maybe some of the challenges of reaching students that you've maybe not connected with. Yeah, is that a big focus for the service now that you've had 1,000 students through the door? But let's get to 2,000, and let's make sure that 2,000 is reflective of the student population. Yeah,
we really want to make ourselves that we're open, that we really have people see that they've got access to it, and really meet the needs of those young males and also the BAME population. I said before, the kind of people with neurodiverse conditions, making sure we can provide for them. We've also kind of recently evaluated the service. So there's just the last sort of 6 months in terms of being a trauma-informed service. So we've very much got the principles of trauma-informed care, and we've really embedded them into the service as well. So that the service, for the benefit of the students, but also the benefit of the staff, that the staff and the students feel it's a safe, accessible environment to kind of come to.
Absolutely. Obviously, day to day, you're very busy. But do you get a chance to sort of reflect on sort of the positivity and the journey that the service has been on in the last sort of 3 years?
Yeah, we do actually. Yeah. The team manager is really good because he's really supportive of that. So we have regular kind of away days where we kind of look at things and take stock of where things are up to, what's worked, what's not working so well. We also have regular CPD slots. So we have kind of training slots on a monthly basis. We have a kind of hour and a half where we'll ask the team what do they like training on. So we have that. We also have, everybody has supervision, and we have team supervision as well. So there's lots of space for us to think about things. Obviously, we're very busy, but there is definitely space where we can think, where are we up to? And we're constantly reflecting on the journey, really.
Yeah. And I guess that's important as well with student populations, because although, that similar age groups, each generation of students every 3 years or even every year, there's a cycle of students who've had maybe in a few years' time, you'll experience that, the COVID GCSE, cohort and those sorts of issues maybe that will come around. So I guess that training is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we had last autumn was the kind of that cohort of students who'd done the kind of A-levels in lockdown. So, and they're thinking about the implications for them that, they've not had that level of independence during that period prior to university, and just thinking how that might impact on them kind of developmentally. So are they as prepared for university as they would have been if they had not been in that period of lockdown?
Absolutely. Big questions, and but hopefully you're providing some big answers for people as well. If people want to find out more information about the Greater Manchester University Student Mental Health Services, some fantastic resources online, working through the Royal Northern College of Music, Manchester Metropolitan University, University of Manchester, University of Salford, and the University of Bolton as well. But students can connect directly with their wellbeing teams in university, and a referral system is then in place.
Yeah.
Brilliant stuff. Dr. Steve Eccles, consultant clinical psychologist. Thank you for your time. Thanks for speaking to us on Mental Health Monday.
Thank you very much.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.